who we are as Christians needs to be grounded in community. How we relate to each other, how we gather, how we understand our relationships, it's all to be grounded in community. We see it in the nature of God, we see it in the early church, we see it in the New Testament ethical mandates. Several misconceptions of Christian community that I'd like to point to. First misconception, good community is problem-free. Some people come into a church, into a Christian community, thinking that everything will be great here because these are the redeemed people of God. It's true, these are the redeemed people of God, but Christian community is not problem-free. There are trials, there are challenges, there are difficulties that come with being in community. People expect that it will be this euphoric experience, and that is often part of Christian community. There's a deep richness to it, but Christian community is not problem-free. In fact, part of the way we form community is by working through problems together. So first misconception is that Christian community is problem-free. Second misconception is that Christian community just happens if you meet the right people. That if you get people with the same perspective, with the right personalities, with the right set of values, then it just all falls into place. Again, that's a misconception of Christian community. First of all, we're not called to gather with people who are identical to ourselves. We don't really get to choose who is in Christian community. It's who God brings together, just as in a biological family. You don't get to choose who your brothers and sisters are and who your parents are. Those are given, and then we figure out how to live together in ways that glorify God, in ways that are consistent with the path of Jesus. So it's not just about getting the right people around you and then Christian community happens. That's a misconception. Third misconception is that community is about meeting my needs. That's a common cultural motif right now. Community is a big value culturally in some ways, but the type of community that many people in our dominant culture desire really is a community that's about meeting my needs. It's about my personal fulfillment. Christian community has to be differentiated from that form of community that is really just consumerism with the veneer of community put over it. Yes, in good community you will be cared for and your needs will be met, but that's not the primary goal. That's not the primary reason that we engage in Christian community. Yes, you will be changed, but that isn't. But we come to community because of the ways we're called by Jesus to do this, and the ways it equips us to engage in God's work in this world. You will have the opportunity and the obligation to meet the needs of others in community. So in that way, you can see it's not just about your own needs. It's not just about my needs. So that's a third misconception, that community is about meeting my needs. Well, what is Christian community? What are some of the features of this community? First of all, Christian community is always centered around Christ. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book Life Together, highlights this connection that as Christians, really we don't connect directly. We connect to each other through Christ. And Christ is the bond that holds us together. Christ is the one that gives meaning and grounding to our community. Second, Christian community is characterized by living intertwined lives. This means that our lives overlap. Christian community has to be more than something that happens for an hour on Sunday morning. It has to be, a Christian community happens when we run into each other during the week, when we're intentional about engagement with each other, when we find ways to spur each other on in our faith, when we're in relationships where we can hold each other accountable, where we know both the strengths and the weaknesses of each other, and we can walk alongside each other. So Christian community involves living intertwined lives. Third, Christian community involves ministering together. It's working side by side, seeking God's shalom, participating in God's mission to this world. There's that element. Christian community isn't just inward focused. There's this always an outward trajectory. It's working side by side, ministering to this world. Fourth, Christian community involves celebrating a diversity of gifts, helping each other to flourish in the use of our many different gifts, gifts used for the sake of the community. Fifth, I've already mentioned this in the theological part, Christian community involves economic sharing. It involves looking out for the physical well-being of one another. It involves coming alongside others when they don't have, when they're out of money, when they're out of work, when there are medical conditions. And this is very much a part of what we see modeled in the early church, and it's something we need to embrace, continue to embrace today. Next, Christian community involves learning together. Learning from God's Word, learning from each other how to forgive, learning how to love, learning how to stand up for justice. Doing these things together, encouraging one another, learning from each other. So I would suggest, I've used the terms somewhat interchangeably, and I want to end by just reiterating that I think Christian community and church are synonymous. They should be interchangeable. The problem we run into is that sometimes we label one thing Christian community over here, and then we start talking about church. We have something else in mind over here. But I would suggest that theologically that these two things are to be identical. And if they're not, how do we strive to live into that reality, that Christian community and church, that the church is called to be community?